Grace tossed and turned in feverish sleep, reliving the events of last week in a vivid dream. Once more she heard the bomber flying over the North Strand, and her heart pounded. She pressed her face anxiously up to the window pane and scanned the night sky. She couldn't see anything, but the droning of the plane became louder, and she felt her pulses racing. Grace wanted the comfort of her mother, but she was too proud to call out. Ma had gone into the kitchen, and Grace thought that she was too old now to be calling for her mammy. It would have been good, though, still to share the bedroom with her older sisters, but there was just herself and Ma living in the cottage now, what with Dad being dead and her older brothers and sisters all left home. Suddenly there was a deafening explosion. The next thing Grace knew, she was coming to in the gutter outside her house, not knowing for a few seconds where she was. She tried moving her arms and legs. They felt sore, but apart from some grazes and scratches, she seemed uninjured. She looked around in horror and saw that many of her neighbours' houses had been wrecked. There were clouds of dust in the air, and she saw bloodied bodies lying further down the roadway. A dead dog lay in the middle of the street, and the tattered remains of someone's wedding dress had been blown into the far gutter. She could hear young children screaming in terror and injured adults moaning and crying out in pain. The realisation of injured people suddenly clarified her muddled thoughts, and her stomach tightened in fear. Ma, where was Ma? Grace rose and ran towards the house. The doorway was completely collapsed, and so she climbed over the rubble of the threshold and was able to pick her way across what used to be their living room. There was dust everywhere, making it hard to see, but part of the wall of the kitchen was still standing, and she made her way as quickly as she could towards it. She went through what was left of the doorway, then stopped in her tracks. A body lay on the floor. Grace recognised the fawn cardigan that Ma had slipped on over her nightdress. She wanted to scream, but in a way that often happened in nightmares, she couldn't make a sound. Oh no, please, God, she thought, running to where her mother lay and falling to her knees beside her. She remembered how awful it had been when Dad had died suddenly, and the idea of losing Ma as well seemed too much to bear. She felt her tears beginning to well up. Then suddenly her mother blinked. Ma, she cried. Her mother opened confused eyes. Grace? Oh, thank God, said Grace, throwing her arms around her. They stayed there for a moment, hugging each other tightly. Then they rose, and Grace held her mother's hand as they made their way out into the street. The roadway was full of injured people, and there was screaming and sobbing from adults and children alike. Ma looked aghast at the desolation. The street was covered from end to end with rubble from collapsed houses. Along the centre of the North Strand, the area's main thoroughfare, Grace could see the tram tracks mangled out of shape and pointing grotesquely into the sky. Suddenly she heard the sound of bells and guessed that it must be the fire brigade or civil defence vehicles approaching at speed. She saw Ma staring at the remains of their house and shaking her head disbelievingly. Grace suspected they were both thinking the same horrible thought, that they might never again live in their happy home. Grace was about to turn away when something protruding from the collapsed brickwork of the cottage caught her eye. She looked again and saw that it was Fido, the toy wooden dog that her dad had carved for her when she was small. It was the only link back to her father, and she wasn't going to let the people who had destroyed her home take that from her too. Before Ma could object, she ran back to the remains of the house, clambering over the broken bricks to get to the toy dog. Grace, what are you doing? Cried Ma. It's Fido. I'm not losing him too, she called back, before extracting the toy, which was battered but still in one piece. The rest of the roof could fall down, cried Ma. Come out this minute. Just then there was a rumble, and Grace looked up in horror as the roof collapsed, burying her in the rubble. Grace felt suffocated and screamed in terror, then awoke with a start. She realised that she'd only been dreaming, and she looked over at Ma in the other bed, still asleep. At least she hadn't screamed out loud and woken everyone. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and wiped the perspiration from her forehead. She stayed there unmoving as her heartbeat gradually returned to normal. Then eventually she lay down again and tried to sleep, praying that she wouldn't have the dream again. Someone had told her that you never have the same dream twice in one night. She hoped that was true, as she lay with closed eyes, trying not to think any more about the most terrifying night of her life.